To begin this card design, the first thing you want to decide is what is going to be the size of your square topper. So you need to find an image for your focal that is at least the size of your cutting die. So this is actually a topper that is 3 1/8. So the first thing I did was take my cutting die, which is a 3-inch square cutting die, and just kind of center and cut that out. I was going to have to trim off the nibs anyway, so that makes a good start. Now, for your base card, what you're going to want to have, in this case, I'm going to use a 5 by 6.5 inch piece of craft cardstock. So, some colors that are in your topper. And then the next layer is going to be a pattern that complements. So, your matte layer is going to come in a bit. I came in 1/8 of an inch, but you can come in wider if you wanted to. And this is kind of a loose pattern, so it's not tight. And so I came in 1/4 inch for my layer piece. And that's going to be a solid that complements your topper. Now, the first thing I want to do is kind of position this a little bit tilted. So a wonky start. And then I want to position this one here and cut through this layer to expose my mat. And so let me do that, and then I'll be back. Okay, I removed my base card from this because now I kind of want to set this up. And so I know I've got this here, and actually it looks like I've placed something on top, but I've cut it in, and that keeps the weight down and the profile of your card down, which is good if you're going to send a lot of Christmas cards. You don't want to pay a lot for postage. Now, I'm going to bring back the color of my base card, and I'm going to go ahead and die cut this 3-inch mat, and that's going to be the mat for my focal. Now, I do this little trick a lot because I don't have squares of every size, and so I'm going to come in here because I want that beveled edge. And I'm going to cut this a little bit smaller. So when I take this through my die cutting machine, I'm going to figure out which part of this I can cut off. And so I'm just going to cut off over here and here. So when I take it through, I'm going to slide it through like this. So I'm not going to cut off anything on this corner, but I can cut it off over here. And this way it's going to fit into this piece. And this way I'm going to have my matted focal. So let me do that, and then I'll be back. Once I'm here, I'm pretty much home free. The only thing is, even though this is cut in, I've really got 2 focals. So I've got my main focal, and then I've got the wonky shadow. So the last thing I want to do is add a sentiment. And I showed you that photo of how I cut it out because I did the same thing. I used a larger cutting die for my mat, and then kind of trimmed it off a little bit askew to create the inside greeting. And now, as I look at this, what I'm looking for kind of is balance. So I know this one maybe needs to be up here, but what I'm seeing first off is my craft color. So I need some craft color up in here, and so I am just going to die cut another star that brings this color out this way, and I'm just going to trim it off against the edge. And rather than cut into another piece, what I've done is I've taken the star out of the backing of this because you're not going to see it. And again, I'm concerned about weight. And then also what I'm saying, well, there's not a whole lot of interest. So I went through my stash. I'm going to add a bow, put it something like this, or a ribbon, and put it like so. And then rather than introduce another ribbon over here, I went back to my panel and die cut this bow, so I'm going to have it here. So before I put anything down, I know I might need some of this cardstock or paper that's underneath some of this stuff I'm loading up. So rather than just keep piling it up, I'm going to cut it out of there and place it. So last thing for me to do is kind of situate that and adhere it to my base card. I'll be back with the finished piece. Here's how the finished card turned out, and so everything is actually really balanced. So I've got my ribbon over here. I've kind of weighted down at the bottom by raising up my sentiment, in this case, on some foam. So add higher dimension and you add weight, and so that's where it belongs on your card. On the inside, could have done a lot of things. Could have brought back my cards, but I've got inserts for this, and so I just added a portion of that for the interior. Of course, I'm going to do a coordinating envelope as well, so I went with some craft paper. Anyway, I'm going to leave photos of the finished piece, and that's actually what I had to introduce, and so now what I want to go with is some variations. So, first thing I'm going to do is turn it around, and then we're going to change the proportions a little bit. Still using a 3-inch square. And after the photos, I'll be back. So this is my finished second piece, and I've turned it around. So I've still got a 5 by 6.5 inch card. And the thing to think about, well, there's a couple things. I did change the ribbon only because I ran out of that. It looked fine. But I put the weight, again, down here at the bottom. If I were to turn this around this way, it would look something like this. So if I could turn up there, I certainly don't want a ribbon coming across the top. But everything's pretty much done the same way. So a 3-inch square, and this panel. Well, because I want to talk about relative sizes. Because in this design, that's what makes the difference. And so I've got a 3-inch square, and I've got about 4 3/4 inch panel. So that is about 1 3/4 difference between the squares that I've got, the Wonky squares on my Christmas card, and this panel piece. And that comes into play as we move along, because I'm thinking, well, I've got to do one of two things. There's a lot of empty space here, so either I have to do something with this panel that makes it a little more interesting, or I've got to shrink this empty space. And so that's going to be my next piece. So now we're at my third sample. So there's a couple things I want to talk about. Same materials. I'm still using Christmas images. This panel, or this mat, is actually busier. And so I've got a lot going on over here. And this topper has a sentiment. And so I don't want to repeat sentiments. So this little cluster, which used to be a sentiment, is now just kind of images that appear in here in the right colors. Because first off, I'm still talking about balance. So I got craft here, and a couple of crafts. And then I've got the shiny ribbon. What I wasn't liking about those first two is I had nothing else shiny on the card. So I added the pearl on top of this die-cut bow, and that gives me some cohesiveness. Now, I do want to talk about relative size. So I shrunk the width of this so that now I've got a 3-inch square and about a 4 1/4 inch panel. So now I'm down to 1 1/4 inches. And I like this a lot better. It's more full. So it's not as empty as the first card. And I didn't show the interior for the last one, so I'm going to show, I just used scraps of my insert. And so those all go together. Now, I've got one last piece, so let me leave photos of that, and then we'll go into the last piece. The last piece with this materials is this one. And so why I was talking about the proportions of your squares versus your panel, because this one's got a much larger border. And this is actually more striking. So I've got that really busy pattern. Of course, it's going to reappear here. I've got my Wonky square topper, but the proportions are still the same. Now, since I have more room to grow, I'm going to extend some of these things a little bit into that mat. I'm going to add a little more heavier stuff, because I actually had this bow over here, but it's too heavy or busy for this size card. And so since I've got more room, expand. It's always interesting to kind of break these planes where you can. And even this one is extended. The other thing I did is I put this on foam squares. But again, I've got the greeting on my focal, and so I've got these elements over here. So once again, I've got the same sort of 4 1/4, and I shrunk it because it doesn't really matter. I shrunk it so I had a narrower border. And then on the inside, I finished it because I ran out of inserts, and so I just used the same materials that I've been using throughout. And so that's how that finished out. And I'm going to leave photos of this last piece as well as how we've progressed. But now what I want to do is take this Christmas card design and introduce some, I want to call them little books, but I'm going to introduce the first one from Kanban Crafts. It's called a Handy Stash. It's the same thing. It's about a 4 by 6 inch image. And then I've got one from Hunky Dory, which I'm actually going to take a page, and we're going to recreate this design using images out of your little book pages. For this greeting, I chose a couple pages to make up this card. First off, of course, I'm going to pick the focal. And I decided with that last card, one of the other things I could do is increase the size of my square. So I'm going with a 3.5 inch square this time. And mostly because that's what's going to fit around this image. So that is going to be my focal. Again, when I cut it, I'm going to kind of cut it off a little bit because I know I'm going to have to come back in and trim it. Then, of course, I've got these two borders on this page. And so I'm going to use those for my strip. And then this paper pad or handy stash also comes with kind of plain papers. And this is a repeating border. So I just married it up and then cut it to size to be this back piece. And then I just used some white and gray cardstock. Now on my layer piece, I decided to dry emboss it just to give it a little more interest without being overpowering. And then the last little bit is I've also got sentiments in here. And so I grabbed a sentiment and cut it to the shape that I wanted for this greeting card. So with a 3.5 inch square, I'm still looking at a 5 by 6.5 inch greeting card. And of course, I'm going to use my leftovers to finish up my interior. And that's a little book page. So this is really easy and real versatile for pretty much anything you've got in your crafty stash. And the last piece I want to look at, I'm going to change the size again. And so I've got a little book page, and here's what he looks like. And so it's actually, a longer image that's going to fit into a square. And so the first thing I did was cut out my focal. But I knew this snowman was holding a gift, and he's going to have to be looking at something. And there was just enough to fit this deer back behind the square that I cut into this card. And so he's still underneath my panel. Actually, he's underneath both. There's a matte and layer piece, and then I got a piece of paper under there. But this is only a 4 by 6 inch card. So this is almost a Christmas note card. And so once again, I kind of wanted to introduce that notion of adding a larger border. So this is the same exact card. Of course, I'm going to add more embellishments. I'm going to move outside my planes to create a 5 by 7. And that is a true finished kind of Christmas greeting card. Anyway, I don't know what's in your stash, but like I said, you can always find squares, whether you've got toppers or whether you've just got images that you can kind of play with and cut apart and divide. So I hope you took something with you that you can use in your own card making, especially this Christmas. And I'm going to leave photos of those last finished pieces, and I thank you for watching.